How's it going? Good afternoon, YouTube. My name is Cohen. I'm founder of Tempest Health and Wellness. I'm a physical therapist based here in Denver. And I've always really liked these expert breakdown videos and the professionals answering question videos that I've seen on a bunch of other channels, and I thought that I would make one. So I sourced all of these questions from the R Fitness on Reddit Moronic Monday page, which I think is kind of funny because I don't really think that there is such a thing as a stupid question. There are stupid answers and sometimes there are stupid questions, but when it comes to stuff like this, I don't really think that's an issue. So let's get started. And I'm going to go through as many of these as I can with the time that I've got. Might pause and get a drink at some point. I had some cancellations and so I had time to get this done. So let's go. So what are good lifting stats for a 15-year-old? This is by me123. I guess that's his username or their username, not sure. Lifting stats. So lifting stats are kind of made up. I am also a personal trainer in addition to being a physical therapist, but I have a pretty extensive musculoskeletal health education and I do help people with performance. Lifting stats are kind of made up. What do I mean by that? In any given context, you may see things like for powerlifting, it's like a double body weight squat and 0.75 times your body weight for overhead pressing and 2.5 times body weight deadlift and all this other stuff. Lifting stats are invented, meaning there's no evidence-based standard that is used to establish them for different sports. If you are 15 years old, you should be getting into the habit of doing resistance training, broadly speaking. Pause, disclaimer. I cannot give any of you training advice without actually having assessed you, met you, talked to you in person. This is just answering this kind of question in general. I also can't diagnose anything over the internet without actually assessing you. So please don't take anything I say too seriously. This is mainly just to give me fun things to answer. They're kind of made up. If you have, the other thing is your training age matters a lot. So if you've been training for a long time, you should be able to lift more weight. If somebody, will use that powerlifting standard that I cited, if somebody had been training for a year and they were not at that point, I would in no way, shape, or form be concerned. The answer is that you should be capable of lifting anything you need to for your activities of daily living and then some by quite a bit. You should have enough muscle mass that it's visible. It should not be hard to find your muscles, especially for somebody like me who's used to palpating. It shouldn't be difficult to find groups of muscles. And that's really it. Depends on your sport, depends on what you're doing, depends how long you've been training. If you are 15 years old, I'm assuming that this person is male. I don't know, meaning male at birth. And so the answer is it really depends on how long you've been training. Extension-medium7772 asks, I got some pain on my right wrist on the pink side. I assume they meant pinky side, so that means here, right over here. I've got this for a few months now. It's very annoying. Anyone have some tips to get rid of it? Somebody who actually wrote in the comments, you should speak to a doctor about this, or a physical therapist. Hi, nice to meet you. Hi, how are you? So you probably are experiencing potentially some TFCC pain. Okay, that's the triangular cartilage that's right here. Why that is happening is something I would have to assess in person. Obviously, easy things to pay attention to is, does it happen with a specific lift? Does it happen in an extended position like this or with weight bearing? And depending on what's going on with that, that would probably indicate that you need to train it. It could be that you are gripping asymmetrically in some way when you're training. There are a lot of reasons that this could be happening. I honestly don't think anybody should be answering this at all. And I appreciate that somebody wrote in the comments, you should speak to a doctor about it if it's been lingering for several months. One thing I would say is find the offending activity, back off of doing that for a while, let it rest, see if it backs off, and then train your wrist up, train up your forearm and see how it goes. Wells Michael 380 asks, I'm gonna maximize this so I can actually see what's going on. Doing half reps until you can't even move the weight. Ooh, I like it. Instead of stopping your set after your last full rep, you can do, is this helpful or harmful for gains? If you are training for hypertrophy purposes, if you're trying to get bigger muscles, doing that on your last set is something that I do. I do it personally. The current state of the evidence is that you don't actually need to fail in order to gain muscle. It is important to move through a full range of motion. And actually the lengthened portion of the range of motion. So if I'm doing a bicep curl, this part, as opposed to this part, is the full range of motion that you really want to pay attention to. So if you start running out of gas and you're doing partials down here, that's fine on your last set especially. especially if the weight's moderate, failing isn't dangerous or anything like that. It just kind of has a bit of a neurological cost and it'll tire you out. So I don't recommend doing it every single set. And yeah, is this helpful or harmful for gains? It's potentially helpful for gains, although again, that the major reviews that have been done recently have indicated that you probably don't need to go to failure on any set. I do have people do that in the beginning so they actually understand what failure is like, because you need to get close to failure. So bottom line is it's potentially helpful. It just depends on where you're putting it in your programming. Let's go to the next question. Honest Parking asks, so I'm getting back into being active, but one issue. I can't decide on what route to take due to the activities I'm going to be involved in this year. I'm doing recreational softball, BJJ, Muay Thai, and also training for a half Ironman next year. Should I lessen all this down? Is there some kind of program that will work? Mostly for BJJ and triathlons. So there's not really a hard and fast answer that anyone could give you here without knowing more about you, Honest Parking. You might be some kind of super athlete and you might be capable of putting up with a ton of volume without any problems. But I will say that all things considered, BJJ and triathlon training might be something you can do at the same time. That's a lot of aerobic activity, all things considered, if you're rolling a lot of BJJ. I did BJJ intensively for summer and I have a pretty extensive martial arts background. You're going to be okay because BJJ doesn't have a lot of impact involved. And so the thing that's going to tucker you out the most, all things considered, is probably the running that's involved in your triathlon training for that half Ironman, which, by the way, kudos. That's an awesome thing to try to do. Could you potentially do that? Recreational softball is probably not going to cut into your volume too much if you're not playing it too often. Should you lessen all this down? If you're not really doing anything else, you might be fine. One thing I would say to round out this program a little bit is there's no resistance training here. So BJJ kind of has a little bit of that element because you're pulling and pushing on stuff, but ultimately at the end of the day, there's no structured resistance training, it sounds like, from what you're saying here. It really just depends on how much volume you're doing. And so is there a way that this could work? Yes. The way I would probably split this up if somebody asked me to program for them or help them program is you need to run, bike, and swim. You probably want some resistance training, and you probably want to have some time to actually do BJJ as a technical skill. So BJJ should be done when you're fresh, so you don't want to do cardio and then do BJJ. You're running, biking, and swimming. You don't want to do a huge amount of volume for each of those, but you do want to train all of them. And you want to do some amount of resistance training so that way your muscles are not the limiting factor when you're doing those things. So you probably don't want to train every single day, although it does sound like this person's pretty active, and then you're going to have time for recreational ball. So I would say some kind of cardiovascular training. Let's say if we were doing this like on a Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, right? We're splitting things up according to days of the week. Monday you do some cardio, and then you do some BJJ the following day. Let's say Wednesday is a game of recreational softball. That'll help you recover. If you repeat that cycle and then you get in a day of resistance training, you might be okay. But I would say that overall this is a very, very ambitious program and you might want to tone things down a little bit. Domino Girl asks, what's more important, your BMI or your body fat percentage? My BMI is slightly high by 1.4, but my body fat percentage is good and low. Domino Girl, you are fine. Don't change anything. A lot of people who do resistance training have a high BMI, even if they're healthy. Body mass index is just the relationship between your weight and your height. It doesn't tell you anything about what that distribution is. What I usually do with my clients is if they have health and fitness related goals, is I tell them to pay more attention to their waist to height ratio. So this is your waist and then your height. And the reason is that that has been shown to be as effective or more effective for tracking disease status. So people who have good waist to height ratios are healthier, all things considered. And the other thing about doing that is it actually tells you something about where the body fat is distributed. So the body fat that is distributed around your middle is the body fat that we actually care about. From a disease standpoint, it most closely correlates with what's called visceral fat, which is the fat that's around your organs, which is the one that we ultimately want to take down a little bit to cut your disease risk. And if you're resistance training, you might have a slightly high BMI. I think I also do, actually, pretty consistently. The nature of my line of work, farming, is about to get extremely busy soon. I won't make it to Mars. I love your username, I won't make it to Mars. The nature of my line of work, farming, is about to get extremely busy soon as planting season begins, meaning I'll be working 14 to 8 hour days. Wow, 14 to 18 hour days with an unpredictable schedule. I'd like to be able to maintain the gains I currently have without losing too much strength. Currently at an 1100-ish total. Okay, so you're a power lifter of some kind. I'm not a power lifter per se, it's a metric for perspective. That's your total lift.
Running a full body routine 4 days a week. If I dedicate about half an hour before work to doing just one compound exercise with warm-ups and working sets for 3x5 at high intensity, could I expect to still keep close to my current numbers? Continue for about 30 to 45 days. In the past, I've usually just skipped working out, and it feels like it takes me a while to get back to where I was again. Okay, so what we're talking about is doing a maintenance phase during a period of extreme work. 14-hour days is brutal. That's a lot. 3x5 at a high intensity. Honestly, you probably will maintain your gains. I'm just not sure you're going to be able to sustain a 3x5 if you're actually working physically for that 14 to 18-hour days every single time. So the best available evidence, if you combine that with some coaching experience and other things, is that basically, if you just want to maintain your level of strength, it doesn't take a lot of volume. So you want the intensity to be relatively high. So minimum, 80, 85% of your max. I would say probably about 85% of your max is a good place to be. 3x5, if you can actually pull that off in that time for each lift, you would want to be setting things up. So if you've got squat, overhead press, deadlift, and bench, you would want to be setting things up so that you hit everything ideally at least once a week. And you should be able to pull that off. Twice a week would probably be a little better because you'd get in a little bit more volume. Obviously, low volume isn't no volume. But all things considered, this is not a terrible plan. I would just potentially consider cutting the sets down so that you could hit two things. So if you're going to push and squat, let's say, or push and deadlift, and then squat and bench, like you could do something like that so that you could do, let's say, a 2x5 and then just maintain your gains. It also really depends on how hard you're working physically during this time period. Wish I could give you more perspective. So let's move on to the next question. By the way, I did not answer every single question on this thread. I just went through, screenshotted everything, and I'm going through as many as I can with the time that I've got. So, Fugue State Blues. Y'all have creative usernames. Just said, just started gymming a couple weeks ago, still focusing on building some baseline strength and forming habits as opposed to adopting a whole plan from the jump. Good idea. The mental aspect of getting into health and fitness is just as important as the lifting aspect. It doesn't really matter. You know, people will be like, oh, you have to PR every single time you walk in the gym when you first start off because you'll get newbie gains. Sure, 100%. But the other side of it is every time you get yourself to go into the gym, if you're not in the habit of doing that, is a win. Just by itself. Even if you don't PR, the point is to just get into a good routine about training regularly, whether that's going to the gym or working out at home. I actually work out at home a lot because going to the gym adds friction to my routine. In the meantime, I'm looking for some routine or feedback in case my freestyle use all the machines plan is totally missing any major muscle groups or important exercises, routine copied below. Okay, so I'm not going to read out this person's entire routine, but I am going to talk about what they're doing broadly. They have leg pressing, chin-ups, shoulder pressing, leg curls, leg extension, ab crunch, bicep curls, chest dip, chest press, lat pull down, seated row. Okay, so this is not terrible, although one thing about it is some of these exercises are better for building muscle than others. So there's a pretty robust body of literature that's come out fairly recently about stretch-related hypertrophy. And if you're new to fitness, I do recommend doing hypertrophy training first, actually. People talk about baseline strength. So in formal strength and conditioning terms, basic strength is in like the 3 to 5 repetition range. I actually don't have beginners do that at all. I get them used to hypertrophy training first, because it's a little bit safer. Not that strength training is dangerous, but hypertrophy training is very forgiving and it's very non-specific. So if you train really heavy bench, you'll get better at benching. You won't build as much muscle as you could if you actually went lighter, did something with more stretch to it. Think about something like an incline press, or ideally like a deficit push-up, or just a push-up on elevated surfaces so that way you get that full stretch on your chest. One thing I am seeing is there's no free weights here. Well, this person said that they're averse to free weights. I'm not really sure why they don't want to do free weights. But yeah, 1 to 2 reps away from failure, just going to failure. Pretty good. Again, I would try to emphasize exercises that have more of a stretch component because that'll improve your mobility at the same time. But yeah, by the way, if you guys are interested in learning how to work out at home so that you don't have to go to the gym and use every single machine there, and you want to get into a routine that is just doable from your house, I kind of help people do that all the time. That's kind of one of the reasons I started the business, other than doing physical therapy in home and all that. So reach out at tempesthealthco.com/contact if you are interested. Do pay what you can. So I guarantee you can afford me. But yeah, this is basically fine. I'm not really seeing anything here that works on your obliques, which you might want to do. And there's, it's just a bunch of machine exercises. Again, it's a really good place to start. I would probably start to move you away from the machines, though. This is a little bit very machine heavy, and you're not going to develop any stabilization. The other thing is that you can't do this at home. Next question. Sanguiz? 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 I don't know how to pronounce your name. I've been working out. I've seen some results with my chest, back, and legs. One spot that still makes me look like an orgasm is my torso. The area I'm talking about is below my chest and above my... I'm not going to say that. I understand it's definitely got to do with body fat in your abs. Does anyone have advice for building muscle around that region? Thanks, much appreciated. So this person already knows that body fat percentage is ultimately what determines the visibility of your abdominal muscles, which is great. In terms of movement patterns that you want to hit, so your spine can flex, it can extend, it can side bend, and it can rotate. And that's actually, when you talk about training your core, it's those movements and those muscles. So any kind of spinal extension is going to train your lower back. Any kind of side bending is going to train your obliques. Rotation will also train your obliques. And flexion is going to train your rectus abdominis, which is the muscles that are in front. The other thing is bracing. This doesn't really contribute to the look of your abs, but it does contribute to the total amount of muscle mass that you have around there and how strong you are, is training your transverse abdominis. So if you take your thumbs, you go below your ribs, you take your fingers, you go in like this, and then you breathe out, you'll feel muscles there tense up. What's actually tensing up is your transverse abdominis. So if you learn to brace that and then you submit it to load by squatting, deadlifting, benching, good mornings, RDLs, anything, and you get used to doing that, your transverse abdominis gets stronger. And your transverse abdominis is a really serious contributor to spinal stability. If you try to do that brace like that, and then if you hold that and try to bend your spine, it's really hard to do. And it turns your spine into this like super rigid structure. It's kind of like if I have a radio tower and then cables going off to the sides like that. And so yeah, most of it is reduction of body fat, unfortunately, but having more muscle there will make you way more functional anyway. So I definitely recommend people train their core. Unrandom asks, I never did deadlift nor squats, and I want to add them to my routine, but I don't want to get people looking at me. I know I don't usually judge people. I know people don't usually judge us in, but they'll look at form as bad, not always for helping, and even less get injured. I do other exercises, but only isolation when I have compound ones. Any tips or videos to help me? Which exercises should I replace for deadlifts? I think hyperextensions for squats, leg press. I don't want to overload my legs. Okay, first of all, why don't you want to overload your legs? If you are training hypertrophy, meaning if you're doing like sets of 6, sets of 7, sets of 8 with a couple reps in the tank, you're not going to overload your legs, but you actually want to overload your legs so that your legs get stronger. Sometimes people are worried about getting like too bulky. It is really, really hard to train sufficiently that you get too bulky. So unrandom, you shouldn't worry about overloading your legs. You should just train them and then get stronger. You will build muscle, but getting to the point that you're too jacked is actually really, really, really difficult. Even if your genetics are good, you have to work your butt off for that. But in terms of replacing things, so I'm a really big fan of foot up on the wall hinging. I'm a really, really big fan of various single leg squats. So things like step ups, things like assisted pistols or pistols, sissy squats. You can do all of that stuff at home. You really don't need anything else if you want to train at home. And I do recommend people do some lower back specific strengthening. The lower back is the area that I find as a physical therapist too, not just as a trainer, is most frequently underdosed. People don't train their lower back directly. They think that's like, oh, I do good mornings twice a week. I don't have to train my lower back. That trains your lower back in a straight position. It does not train your lower back in a flexed position. And that flexed position is going to get you a lot of ability, a lot of robust ability to handle things in real life, because we can't always get into a perfectly organized position before we lift. You just shouldn't train it super heavy. So you want to train the flex back to extension relatively light. In the beginning, I have people just use body weight with no added special leverage or anything like that. Think about a really simple seated Jefferson curl or standing Jefferson curl. And then go from there. And yeah, keep at it. Get into those compound lifts. Let's see. Next question. Ecstatic Bumble. Good name. Asks, hey, suppose you had a few days a week in general where you couldn't work out as often. Couldn't eat as healthy as you wanted to on vacation, etc. How do you recover, get back on track to your fitness goals after these times? I never am off track. That's how. This is something that I make sure all of my clients understand. If you are getting into health and fitness and working out, unless you are preparing for a specific contest, event, or test, this is a permanent change. And what that means is it has to be sustainable. And other than just how much volume you're doing, how frequent, and all that other stuff, one of the things I like to work with people on as a PT, as a trainer, as a health coach, is this thing about not having too rigid a discipline. So I'm a big fan of what I call flexible systems. So I am on track as long as I am generally eating healthy about 80-90% of the time, training most days of the week, most of the time. Aside from the fact that deloading is a good idea, so a lot of beginners can get away with just training, and they'll keep making linear gains. After a while, you have to do what's called a deload. For most people, again, exceptional, people who are really good athletes or anything like that. Sometimes you meet people who are just exceptional and they can just eat volume, no problem. But you have to deload. So a deload is kind of like if you have a revolver and you fire 6 shots, you need to reload the revolver before you can shoot again, right? A deload is where anywhere from 4 to 12 weeks, it really depends on how hard you're training, what sports you're doing, and what your focus is. You take some time where you reduce your volume or you don't train. And so periodically having a few days off because of life circumstances is fine as long as you're generally in the gym. And eating healthy and all that other stuff. Yeah, so don't change too much. All right, next question. I'm a little concerned. This is perspective 3432. I'm a little concerned. I was in an extreme cutting phase for roughly 16 weeks, then went and binged for Easter for 3 days straight and weighed in 10 pounds heavier today. Will the bloat go away? What should I do? Thank you. I'm a little concerned too. Obviously, this is not a situation where I know what's going on with you. Perspective 3432. But I really sincerely hope that you are not in a habit of cutting really aggressively all the time. There are people who can do it without it causing any problems, but generally speaking, the more aggressive your calorie cut is, the less sustainable it is, the more psychological side effects you're going to feel. So extreme hunger, fatigue, lack of focus, irritability, difficulty sleeping, all of that stuff is going to happen if you're cutting calories too aggressively. 16 weeks is pretty long for some kind of aggressive cutting phase. And when binge for Easter for 3 days straight, that's a long time. There is something called BED, BED, binge eating disorder. So people who are in the habit of kind of restricting and then eating a lot, sometimes get into this. It is a condition which needs to be sorted out with a psychologist or a dietitian. Weighed in 10 pounds heavier. So that 10 pounds heavier could be a lot of things, depending on what you ate on Easter, in theory. Again, I can't speak to this specific situation because I don't know this person, but broadly, if something like this happens, it can be salt. So if you eat a lot more sodium than you're used to eating and exercising less, you may temporarily gain water weight, which will flush out over time. You just drink water and you exercise, it'll pass. It could be carbohydrates. So if you were cutting really aggressively and then you loaded up on carbs, carbohydrates are stored in your muscles as glycogen. Glycogen is how mammals store carbohydrates. We don't have starches in our body the way that plants do. We have glycogen. And so it holds water really, really, really well. If you ate a lot of sugar, some of the puffy sort of feeling in your stomach might just be kind of general gastrointestinal bloating. I wouldn't worry about it too much. I would just get back on track with something a little more sustainable and hopefully don't cut as aggressively. You really shouldn't be losing weight super, super, super fast because it's not great. You'll lose muscle, and gaining muscle is a lot harder than losing fat. So when people are on a fat loss phase, you want to be losing half a pound a week, eating sufficient amounts of protein, eating a sufficient amount of calories other than that so that you can still train hard enough to help maintain your muscle mass. People think of protein as if it's the only, I've heard this sometimes from athletes that I work with. They're like, oh, I'm eating tons of protein. I don't need to worry about my training volume while I'm cutting. It's like, no, the thing that really helps you maintain muscle mass is primarily resistance training. And then having a higher protein diet helps, but it's not the main driver. If there's no signal, there's this thing called Wolff's Law, which is basically that biological systems adapt to the stresses that they're put under. And if you are loading heavy, that tells your body, it tells your muscles and your bones and your organs and all that other stuff, I need you to hold on to this. Please don't lose muscle mass. If you're just cutting really aggressively, you're probably not going to be training that hard because you can't put in high effort because your calories are too low. So I would get away from doing that. Next question. We only have a couple more. I really enjoy my PPL split. That's probably push-pull legs. This is Fraj. I really enjoy my PPL split, push-pull legs, but tend to go to the gym 4 times a week, which is a bit awkward. My issue is the 4th day. I've been just continuing the PPL cycle, but feel like that's not great as you don't get to work every muscle group twice a week. Okay, what would be the best solution here? Fraj, you are correct. The current available evidence seems to indicate that frequency is important. So if you're working on a muscle group, I would say for people who aren't specializing, right? Sometimes during like in a bodybuilding or bulking phase, you might want to specialize in something that you feel like you need a little bit of work on. You know, let's say you feel like your chest is not as developed as it should be or something like that. But PPL actually kind of isn't ideal. I tend to not have people do that for the simple reason that they don't end up really hitting things twice a week if they're only in the gym 4 times or 5 times a week. So whole body, like 3 days a week would be better. And people who are like, I can't do whole body 3 days a week. I'm like, you probably can't train your legs for a long period of time. You can't train your legs more than twice a week. So that's fine. So let's say like a whole body and then an upper plus core or upper plus accessories day, and then a whole body. I will also say that actually the evidence is that you can do a lot of sets a week of legs as long as what you're doing doesn't have a high stimulus to fatigue ratio. So stimulus to fatigue is basically if you consider something like a full body like I'm deadlifting, like a conventional deadlift with a sufficient amount of weight, that's really high fatigue. It's a great stimulus, but it's also really high fatigue. If you think about an exercise like a ring sissy squat, really good stimulus for the quads specifically. It's like a great stimulus for your quads. But big stretch, load, right, the whole bit, it's not very fatiguing. There's no axial load, so the stimulus to fatigue ratio for your quads there is better. I really, really like ring sissy squats. I use them frequently. They establish range of motion through the quadricep muscle so well. I've used them in a PT context. I've used them in a training context. They're awesome. So yeah, it really just depends on your exercise selection. And if you are having trouble with that, may I recommend reaching out to somebody who's a musculoskeletal professional and knows what they're doing. Hi, tempesthealthco.com/contact. Go ahead, Fraj. I live in Denver. It'll be fun. This is the kind of thing I can do online. So, got a couple more questions. Jaro Jajan. You guys are killing me with these names here. Asked how to start doing pull-ups as a beginner if my gym doesn't have a dedicated machine. I used to go to a gym that did have one. You could take off your body weight by adding plates, serve as a counterbalance. In return, you wouldn't be pulling your entire weight up, only minus the plates on the machine. Okay, some people who wrote about negatives and resistance bands. No offense, but no. As somebody who had a lot of trouble getting their first pull-up, I am tall and long-limbed. My wingspan is 6'10". I'm 6'2", so I have to deal with a lot of leverage when I'm doing pull-ups. I never got anywhere just doing negatives, and I never got anywhere doing resistance bands, and we'll talk about why in a second. Resistance bands don't work very well because resistance bands give you a ton of help out of the bottom and less at the top. And the pull-up, that's the hard part, is the bottom. So you're getting the most assistance where you want to be training the hardest. Not very good. Negatives don't work. Negatives are okay because you will build muscle doing that, but you won't actually develop the strength to do the concentric. So what do? I think what's really hard for people to sometimes grok is that your body's not a bean counter. This is a saying that I use in PT and as a trainer a lot and as a health coach as well. There is no perfect calculus that your body does about, you do need to progress over time, but how you do that doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter if you know the numbers exactly. So one of the things I like to have people do is find a place to do pull-ups. Bring a chair, folding chair, put a chair, you get a pull-up bar, you stick it up on your door, whatever it is, and then use your feet. Novel concept, right? You can actually do the full movement with your feet on a chair or some other surface, and then take it down to 1 foot, reduce the amount of weight that you've got on that foot, right? There's a huge difference between having half of your weight on that foot and 20% or something like that, and gradually build up the strength that way. Works really well. Sets of 3 to 5 if you wanted to get it quick. And that way you can still work on a proper concentric, because the issue with doing pull-ups without that concentric is you're never going to work on that part of the skill. You're only going to work on the negative, and doing really, really, really slow negatives does not necessarily get you concentric strength the way that you would want. Because strength is a skill, which means you have to practice often. The other thing about it is if your gym doesn't have one, they probably have a cable machine, and you can actually take a weight belt and put it on the 2 cables if they are evenly parallel, and then string it up between them and then step on it and use that as an assist. And I've done that with people as well. All right, this is going to be our last set of questions. Last one is from Cholo's Making Cupcakes. What kind of cupcakes are you making? Horchata? That sounds good. If my goal is body recomposition, losing fat but gaining muscle, and at the end of the day, I'm under my recommendations for both protein and calories. Is it better to eat more protein or not eat anything and end the day with fewer calories? Ooh, spicy question. All right, here's the problem. Recomping is something beginners can get away with, and actually some more intermediate or advanced athletes can even do. I still recomposition. I haven't lost a lot of body weight recently, but I have lost body fat. If you measure my waist to height ratio, that's improved. If you look at how I look in the mirror, that's improved. So that's recomping. And that means that you have lost fat and gained muscle. Typically you're gaining muscle and then you're losing a little bit of fat. You gain muscle and you lose a little bit of fat because you're not going to lose a ton of fat and then gain muscle because then you would still lose weight. And if you're under your recommendations for protein and calories, most people when they first start working out need to lose weight. A lot of people when they start working out need to lose body fat. And so if you are overweight and you're doing this, it's fine to just keep everything the same. There is a little bit of evidence recently. I'm not a dietitian, just to be completely clear. And I don't think that people should focus too much on counting their macros aggressively in the beginning. Just get into the habit of eating a sufficient amount of protein for resistance training. And which is more, generally speaking, more than the recommended daily allowance. If you have a condition that precludes that, that's between you and your physician or dietitian. But most people can very safely eat more protein and not worry about it, according to recent evidence. If you were hungry and you wanted to eat more food and you are under for protein, what you have established as your macros for protein, then go for it. But one of the things is at the end of the day, are you getting stronger? If you're in a recomp phase and you're getting stronger, you're doing something right. So if your weight doesn't change, but you keep on getting stronger consistently, you have to be gaining muscle. You can't just keep on having neurological adaptations forever. So if you're in a long, slow recomp and you're getting stronger and you consistently look better over the weeks, you take a photo of yourself in the same lighting conditions at the same time of day in the same outfit, and you look better, you're doing something right. And I wouldn't change anything. I wouldn't try to deliberately eat more protein. I will say that some of the people I've worked with who have gotten really into counting their macros sometimes run into a problem, which is that you get really fixated on the numbers. And it's like, you never really learn to read your signals a little bit and kind of plan appropriately. It's like, if I have a really long run plan, do I eat more carbohydrates than usual? Yes. If I have a really long workout plan, do I eat a little bit more calories than usual? Generally, yes. If I didn't work out as hard that day, do I eat a little bit less calories? Yeah, and you don't necessarily have to do this by tracking really aggressively as long as you're still seeing results. I think tracking for 3 days at a time and then taking an average can be a really useful way to do an audit and see if your sort of general attempts to eat healthy are lining up with your goals. But after a while, you can't track. For most people, they don't have the discipline to track forever. That's something that I've seen as well. And I do work with people on strategies about how to eat a little bit more mindfully. And that's pretty much it. This was a lot of fun. I would really like to do this again at some point. So I will probably be checking in on Moronic Mondays. I don't know if I'm going to do it every week, but it's a lot of fun. I've been Cohen. I am a physical therapist based here in Denver, founder of Tempest Health and Wellness. I do mobile, pay what you can physical therapy if you were listening up until now. And if you want to, questions, comments, any concerns, anything like that, drop them down in the comments. If you like this kind of thing, feel free to subscribe to the channel. And if you want to reach out to me directly about a specific problem, please feel free to do so at tempesthealthco.com. That's really it. Have a good day, guys. Keep training.